a lot of guys want to know in our community, in the Dati Leumi community, there's plenty of illness, but there's no machlokas about following doctor's orders and closing shuls and social distancing and things like that. Could the Rosh Yeshiva share with us his thoughts whether there's such a thing as Torah Magenis and therefore, so long as we learn, everything will be okay versus, let's say, versus the other approach?
I am very, very disappointed and very dismayed what's happening in Israel and many different societies. Chuvas Maharil, 700 years ago in Siman Lamed Hey, quoted in the Ramah, Kuftet Zayin Yoredeya, that in Maharil was asked regarding pandemics. So in Bava Kama Daf Samach we find, Dever Be'ir Kaneis Raglecha. Chazal teach us, if there's a megay, if there's an epidemic, probably everybody knows the difference between an epidemic and a pandemic. An epidemic is more localized, like we've known for thousands of years. A pandemic is when it goes global, like COVID-19. So the Gemara says, Kanes Raglecha. But we find very early sources going back 900 years that the Gedolim Paskin run away. In their days, they believed that epidemics are caused by kilkul hu'avir, ha'avir me'upash. They thought there's something bad in the air. So run away, go elsewhere. And that is the way epidemics spread. Because when tragedy struck and people started dying, people went elsewhere. And that is how they spread the virus. People that were infected, many of them didn't have symptoms yet, and they ran away and they spread the virus. So we find two approaches. How are we supposed to act when an epidemic strikes? So the Meril says, at the beginning, run away. If it's already rampant, lock up. That makes sense, even though they didn't have the science. But so the Shem Le'arev. When it's just beginning, you could assume that you weren't infected, yet you're healthy, then get out. But in the midst of the epidemic, we don't want to spread the virus elsewhere, so lock yourself in. So the Marir was asked, we believe Ein Yisurim Belichet, Ein Misa B'liyavoin, and everything is Min Hashamayim. So what's the point in running away? Could you run away from a Kodesh Baruch Hu? You could run, but you can't hide. So what's the point in running away? The same question was presented to the Rashbash, the son of the Tashbitz, who was a generation after the Maharil. And both deal with a philosophical dilemma. Yes, we believe in Hashgacha Pratis, but still, you got to do your Hishtadlis. So these two Rishonim grappled with the question, what's the point in locking up? What's the point in running away? We believe that everything that happens is Min Hashamayim. So without going into philosophy, Rabbi Kiva ben Yosef says, Perek Gimel Masechet Avos, 4 words. It's the only place I remember the Rambam being in the spoil. It's not typical for the Rambam. Rabbi Kiva says, Hakol tzafui v'harishut nituna. Seemed to be a contradiction. Everything is predestined, but you bear responsibility. Hakol tzafui. Nothing will happen, nothing will ever happen without heavenly decree. But that doesn't mean that you are not responsible. And the Rambam says, wow, this is a statement that is fitting. This needs to be said by Rebbe Kiva, the greatest Tana. There is also huge segments that just are tired of this entire pandemic and they just ignore the rules. We are the ones that are supposed to teach the world Torah values. And one of the most fundamental Torah values, as we all know, is pikuach nefesh. So for the past 7 months, I've been doing my best to plead and to convince and to preach and to beg for people to follow the rules. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of mistrust. I'm quite dismayed about it, but it's a fact. And it's our duty, it's everyone's duty to try to influence as far as his influence goes. I think we should be more outspoken and more caring about life than any other society. We are the torch bearers of halacha, and in halacha pikuach nefesh overrides any other consideration. So these are the facts of life, and we need to try to do our best to steer people in the right direction. And you need to do your ishtadlus, and you need to follow what the doctors say. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Pure halacha. It comes in different forms. I'll give the simplest case. A person finds out over Yontif that he's in bidud, that he's in quarantine. He doesn't have access to a sukkah. He's an ones. Is there any value in him avoiding washing or mizonos because he has to eat in the house?
He doesn't have a sukkah?
He has no access to a sukkah, either because he can't contaminate the sukkah because he's COVID positive, or because he was planning to share a sukkah with some other family. But in this instance...
Yeah, I was asked this question by many, many people. And the question comes in very many different variations. In many places in the world, people don't have porches. That's out. It's outdated. So in any from Shkuna in Israel, or in many sections of New York, the developers know that you need to have a sukkah merpeset. People in Manhattan usually don't have porches. And many of them eat in communal sukkahs. Now, according to the regulations, a sukkah that usually hosted 300 people could only host 25. So my psak was an interesting psak. First night Yom Tov, everybody gets 5 minutes. Wash, eat a kazayas bench. Your wife should not be there because she's put them in a sukkah. Then go home and eat barburim, slav, vedogim. You know, that's one of the Zmidas Shabbos. Bosa v'yayin, put them in a sukkah, and that's for Simchas Yom Tov. Many of the people in Manhattan don't have porches, but they have summer houses. And I say, if you have a summer house, go out there for sukkahs and build a sukkah. Do I need to rent an apartment for sukkahs? So I say, well, if you have a summer vacation in the Alps, and you could afford $10,000 to have a week in the Alps in the summer, or a ski vacation in Utah in the middle of the winter, then yeah, then you need to rent a house for sukkahs. But those that can't afford it, and there are many, put them in a sukkah. So regarding people that are in bidud, even people that have corona, I want to make a comment. I am the one, more than anyone else in Haredi society, that demands following rules and regulations, but you do need to apply common sense. So according to Misrad Briyut, what are you supposed to do if one family member has COVID-19 and he doesn't have a private toilet in his room? Do you need to buy him diapers for an adult? No. So Mr. Briyut says when he needs to go to the bathroom, everybody else locks himself in his room, goes to the bathroom, put on your mask, put on gloves, disinfect, air it out for some time, and the best you could do. I say the sukkah is as important as the bathroom, you know, lahav l'elef avdalas. So you give the boy that's in bidud or the girl that's in bidud, or even if he has corona, give him his 15 minutes, his half hour. All the other family members will be in their rooms. He'll eat in the sukkah. He's going to go back to his private quarters. You're going to disinfect the sukkah, air it out, and hopefully everybody will be well. So I'm not aware that Misad B'Yud dealt with the sukkah, but they did deal with the bathroom, and you need to be reasonable and sensible. So there was a big argument in one of the houses in Yerushalayim. One of the neighbors had COVID, and he did have a sukkah, which he built. And the first day Chalamoid, he had COVID. The other neighbor said, we don't want you to use the stairwell. And he said, please, I have a sukkah. I want to eat my sukkah. And I said, okay, the neighbors should agree. Every night, 9 o'clock, all the others will stay in their houses. Give him his 20 minutes. Nobody will leave his house. Get into your sukkah, eat, go back to your home. So, yes, this disease is extremely contagious, but we do know something about viruses and bacteria. And you need to be sensible. So that is my general approach. However, many people just can't have a sukkah because they plan to go to their parents. Many young couples live in yechidot diur. They have nowhere to build a sukkah. Their parents can't accept them. They're fine, but the parents are elderly or somebody out there has COVID. So there are many people that just don't have a sukkah. So Rebelli asked, is there a point not eating pas? I think there is, but it's only a midas chasidus. You're put them in a sukkah. And if you're put them in a sukkah, you put them in a sukkah. We do not find cholev mishamshov mitztayer chol chidrochem that are put them in a sukkah any halachic reference that they shouldn't eat pas. Oilam kimen hagei, and if you're potter, you're potter. I think it would be defined as a midas chasidus, maybe, to minimize achilas pas, but it's definitely not a halachic requirement.
Okay, thank you. A shaila which I know for this Talmud to be halacha l'maisa, but in life it's halacha l'maisa at some point for all of us. And that is the Rav's view on being able to daven for somebody for whom there is no medical solution. And essentially you're davening for a miracle.
The formula I suggest is we daven sha'kodesh baruch hu yismala olav rachamim. Rachamei Shamayim is important at any stage and whatever it will be. So the Aruch HaShulchan paskins Shin Lamed Vav in Hilchos Bikur Cholim, based on the Rosh in Masechet Nedorim, that sometimes we daven for a person he should die if he's in terrible suffering. I disagree with the Aruch HaShulchan. It's in the Rosh, but it's not on the Shulchan Aruch. It's not on the Beis Yosef. Why didn't the Shulchan Aruch quote it? Why doesn't the Beis Yosef bring it? I don't think we should paskin fetching a rush when the Ran has a different pshat. I don't feel comfortable ever davening for a person to die. Leave that up to a Kodesh Baruch. On the other hand, we don't daven for miracles. So as long as there's any chance, even a slim chance, we would ask for a refuah shalem. But sometimes things have gone to a point of no return. And in that stage, I think we should daven sha'kodesh baruch hu yismala olav rachamim. And what a Kodesh Baruch Hu does with his rachamim, he knows best. But we always need rachamei shamayim, even when you're dying. So that is the formula I suggest to people. And this is a question that comes up every day to our dismay. So never daven for a person to die. But sometimes you just can't daven for a refuah shalem. Because according to the Chazal, you don't ask for miracles. And you also will not have proper kavanah. I think it's a mistake to daven just saying words when you know that it's not going to happen. And therefore, the formula that I suggest is שהקדוש ברוך הוא ישמח עליו רחמים וירחמהו. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu best knows what to do with those rachamim.
Okay, thank you. This Talmud, all our Talmidim will soon be at an age of serious dating and marriage. And this Talmud would like to know what advice the Rosh Hashiva has to fulfill the bracha that everybody gets, which is to build a bayis neman b'Yisrael.
Yes. Where do we find this expression of bayis neman b'Yisrael? I once thought it's a modern expression until I came across a pasuk in Navi in which I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises David that his son will build a bayis neman, and the Rishonim interpret this as a bayis kayom. It should be an everlasting bayis. Many times I wish Chassanim and Kalas they should build a bayis gadol b'Yisrael based on the Gemara in Megillah, that a bayis gadol is a bayis shemegadlam by Torah and a bayis shemegadlam by Tefillah. So both brachas are sourced on sources, are based on sources, a bayis neman and a bayis gadol. You need to find a kala that's a Yereas Shemayim. Midas are very important. It's well known, the Klei Yokar and the Drosha Saran. Why does Avraham send Eliezer back to his homeland? They were all over the Avodah Zorah back there. And Avraham had a steady battle. And Dafkan Eretz Canaan, he had thousands of Talmidim. Nikbetzu Erev Alofim V'Rev Weiss. Both the Ran and the Klei Yokar say that what was most important to Avraham Avinu is to find a girl that has Midas Tayus. So what could I say? You need to find a girl that you could love, that appeals to you, and she has beautiful Midas, and everything else that is important to build a Jewish home. She should love Torah. She should have Ahavas Abrias and Ahavas Torah and Yer Shemayim and beautiful Midas. And she needs to appeal to you. So in this area, my brachas are probably better than my eitzes. And they should all find the world of Fakalas.
Okay. A Talmud asks as follows. He hears people saying all the time now that they can't wait for life to go back to the way it was before the pandemic. He's bothered by, was life so great before the pandemic? What exactly, would do we really want life to be like afterwards? Can the Rosh Hashiva talk about that topic?
I think the first wave brought out the best of us, the best in us. The second wave is bringing out the worst in us, and that I'm very disturbed by that. I remember the atmosphere at Pesach time. We all locked down, and I think we all became more sensitive and more compassionate and more listening. To my dismay, it's not the same this time around, at least b'machoizei seinu. It's only natural that people want to come back to normalcy. This is not a normal mode. If kids don't go to school, that's not normal. Kids need to go to school and boys need to be in yeshivas. I mean, what this pandemic did to the Torah world is tragic. Yeshivas just fell apart and disintegrated. And it's just unbelievable that you boys are learning in yeshiva with no COVID. You seem to have such unbelievable discipline, and I applaud you for it. So it's only natural that people want to go back to normalcy. But I really hope that we won't go back exactly to where we were before this pandemic. People need to take advantage of every situation, and every challenge is also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to rise. And I hope we will come out of this pandemic more compassionate, more caring, more aware of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. I'm shocked by young people not caring about becoming infected. There was even a lot of talk about intentionally becoming infected. So yes, young boys that are healthy and vibrant, very unlikely that they'll have any sustained damage. But many people are dying, the elderly and the ill and the sick. So I very much hope we will come out of this dark era more aware that we're all in the same boat, more compassionate, more caring, more sensitive. To me personally, this period has been one which is very hard on me. I'm not seeing people. It's almost 8 months. It's almost 8 months till I felt flesh in my hand. I haven't given my hand to anyone for 7.5 months. 7.5 months, maybe a little less since Purim. And I love people. I'm not seeing much of my family. You know, they're staying away. We see each other in Zoom. Right now, you can't see this, but I'm turning my computer around. And do you see a glass box, a plastic box I'm sitting in my sukkah? You see? So my Einiklach call this the aquarium, and they wonder where's the water. But, well, I'm not an amphibian. So this is not a normal time, and we all want to get back to see our children and hug them and kiss them and come together. On the other hand, for me, it's been an amazing period of teaching. I've done more writing in the last 6 months than ever before, any equivalent period. Right after Yom Tov, we're going to put the finishing touches on a Sefer Minchas Osher Corona that will have more than 500 pages. And, you know, this just came to be in a few months, and I wrote 1,000 different sugas which are not related to Corona. So as I said, it's a challenge, and you need to take advantage of every nisayon and every period of difficulty. So I do hope we won't come back to where we were before this pandemic. I hope it will be better, wiser. Let's just hope. One of my personal hopes, I don't think I'll go back to dancing at 5 chasanas and bar mitzvahs and noyams every night. So on one hand, I like to make people happy, but I think it's been months since I went to any simchas. So I do intend to go to some simchas, but I don't intend to go back to the previous norm.
Can I keep going?
Yeah, one more or two more.
Okay, two more. One halachic and one more hashkafic. So here's the question. Sometimes poskim will say, whatever you do, you'll be fine. David kamar Ovid, David kamar Ovid. In terms of kedima bebrachos, we find this. That seems to be against the Russian Sanhedrin that says, "V'heicha shenechlaku shnei gidolim bipsak halacha." I'll read it for other people, not for the Rosh Hashiva. Lo yomar hadayan efso kamisha ertzeh vim asa kain zehu din sheker. Ela im chacham gadolhu gamir v'savir v'yodea lahachriya kidivrei ha'echad burayos buros unechochos harishus biyado. which approach is the approach of the Rosh Yeshiva? Which approach, are there different areas of halacha, dini mamonos, other areas, or is that two different approaches to halacha?
I don't think it's different areas of halacha. I don't even think it's two different approaches. I think it's different situations, different scenarios. What the Rush means to say is you can't just have an easy way out. And instead of amal and investing toil in bitter halacha, say, well, these are great, those are great, then I will decide whatever I want. That is illegitimate. If you are a chacham, then you need to decide who's right and who's wrong. What the Rush rejects is just deciding, I'm going to paskin in accordance to A or in accordance to B. Why A, why B? Go through the halacha and decide. So the Rush was 850 years ago. He's dealing with the Rishonim. The Ovid Kamar of it, what the Ovid Kamar of it, is not what the Rush is rejecting. The Rush is rejecting, you cannot decide you're going to pass in accordance to A or accordance to B. The Ovid Kamar of it, or the Ovid Kamar of it, is after we did invest Omal. And we went through the sugya. And we cannot really decide because both have valid arguments, both have valid points. And mesvara yesh mokum lakan ulachan. And it's not a lopsided machlokes, the Rishonim against Achrayim. In that case, after all the Amal and Yegiyah, that's our conclusion. The Ovid Kamar Ovid, the Ovid Kamar Ovid. What the Rosh is rejecting is, well, the Rambam feels this way, the Ramban that feels that way. I'm going to say that Rambam is right or that Rambam is right, not because I know that, because, I'll just adapt one of the two. That is what the Rosh is rejecting. And the Rosh says, if you could, go through the sugya and decide. We went through the sugya. And there is no hachrora brura. It is then that halacha dictates the Ovid Kamar Ovid or the Ovid Kamar Ovid. So I don't think it depends on the nature of the different areas of halacha. But you did make a point. There are different approaches to halacha. And I think there's a fundamental different approach between the Rishonim of Ashkenaz and Sfarad. And it is most striking the way we relate to the Gaonim. The Ramban and the Gedolei Sfarad had tremendous reverence to the Gaonim, and they never are choilek on the Gaonim. The Bali Toisus had no espalas, and they reject the Gaonim. So there are different attitudes and different approaches in the Mesiris and the tradition of halacha, but I don't think that the Ovid Kamar Ovid contradicts the Rosh and Sanhedrin that you quoted. I hope I made myself clear.
Okay, but so now a follow-up from me, and I'm happy for the Rosh Yeshiva to just reject it. In the introduction to Igros Moshe, I think Rav Moshe says something along the lines of, if you follow the path properly, the psak halacha is the psak halacha, whether in Shamayim it's the right psak or not. And I think in the introduction to Minchas Asher, the Minchas Asher says otherwise.
The Ovid Kamar Ovid, the Ovid Kamar Ovid. It's a very striking introduction, the Igros Moshe introduction. And I want you to look into the introduction to the Yabia Omer Chelek Aleph and Igros Moshe Chelek Aleph. What a contrast. What a contrast. And it reflects the derech and psak of these two great Gedolim. Rav Moshe says, do your homework, be diligent, do your best, and be happy. Whatever your conclusion will be, that's your Torah. And and that reflects Rav Moshe's derech. Rav Moshe disregards 500 years of Torah Shabbat. He almost disregards Achrayim. And many of his psukim are based on the Sugya, Gemaras and Rishonim. Rav Avadia was the extreme opposite. And in his introduction to the first volume of Biyom, and he speaks about you cannot paskin unless you went through all the Achrayim, and you need to know what everybody says. Well, the Minchas Osher is somewhere in the middle. But I wrote a beautiful thought in the introduction to Minchas Osher, which Rev Eli is referring to, and I want to share it with our Talmidim. I think it's a beautiful thought. So I asked, what does emes la'amito mean? Is there partial truth? Either it's true or it ain't true. What is emes la'amito? So the Torah and the Bach deal with this question at the beginning of Hashem Mishpat. And they say it needs to be emes in Torah, and it needs to be emes factually. So a dayan needs to understand the ways of the world. He needs to understand people. He needs to understand the subject matter. That's the Torah and the Bach. I have a different feeling. Based on the story of Tanur Shelachanoi in Bava Metzia, Tefnun Tes. There was a baskal coming out of the heavens. And Rabbi Yeshua says, which means, yesh emet elokit, godly truth. But that is not Torah truth. It's not the derech hapsak. Kvar nikna Torah mesinai, achrei rabim lahatais. We can never know whether our truth and our halacha conclusions coincide with the heavenly truth. If they do, then we're lucky, because that's the ultimate truth. That is the emes la'amito. If we are zeicha that our conclusions, which is the truth of Torah, does coincide with the emes ha'emet elokit up there. Who knows? Maybe once in a lifetime. Maybe never. Maybe every day. We can never know. And why is he nasa shutav lakodesh Baruch Hu b'masa bereishis? Because the Medrash and Parshas Bereishis, Chazal teach us HaKadosh Baruch Hu was tackle b'Torah v'bora alma. The Degel Machar Ephraim says, La'achar shenitne Torah liYisrael, it is our learning that is mechadish the Bria. So when HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, there was only one emes, because nobody learned Torah. Humankind was not created yet. So the Torah, Bria Suwaila, and the creation was with Ha'emet Elokit. Kol dayan adan den emes le'amita. If his truth coincides with the heavenly truth, it is ke'ilu nasa shutaf lakodesh Baruch Hu b'masa bereishis. So that was my thought that Eddie was referring to. Yes, so it is our duty just to learn, daven, hope that and maybe sometimes we're a machaven emes la'amito. So there are different approaches in halacha. It's very striking to read the introductions of Rav Moshe and Rav Ovadia, and the Ramban and the Rosh, the Rishonim of Ashkenaz and Sfarad had very different approaches. I don't know whether we ever spoke about the Marshal and Perek Merubah. Did I ever share this with the Talmidim?
No.
The Marshal describes the greatness of Balei HaTosfos. And he writes such an interesting passage that the Marshal writes. The Marshal was an Ashkenazi zealot. He was a big chassid of Gedolei Ashkenaz. Who else would dare to write that Rabbeinu Tam was much greater than the Rambam? Nobody would dare to write that besides the Marshal. They were both 400 years older than him. And he says, I know them. Rabbeinu Tam was much greater than the Rambam. How can he say that? But anyway, the Mashal describes Balei Toises. Also as kol hashas kekadur v'gilgeluhu mamokim lamokim. They turned the shas into a ball, and they just rolled it from one end of shas to the other. What does the Mashal mean? We have tshuvas of Goinim. We know nothing about their derech halimut. It is Toises that came out with an assumption that the shas needs to be consistent. That was a revolutionary approach. Who says shas needs to be consistent? Maybe it's just a compilation. Different gedolim, different opinions. The same Tana sometimes said this, other times said that. We don't know whether this assumption was shared by the Goinim. We first find this approach in Balei Toises. Also, as kol hashas kikadur v'gilgeluha mamokim lamokim, they had 1,000 steers. As 1,000 steers bred 10,000 terutzim. That's 10,000 halachas. And that is how halacha was born and developed. That was the greatness of Balei and Toises, and all the others followed in their footsteps. So that's a description of the Marshal. So why did I mention this Marshal? What was I discussing, Gary?
We're talking about the derech psak halacha.
Yeah. So the Balei and Toises questioned everything. They didn't accept the Piskei Gaonim Kamoshem. The Rambam did. That's the tradition of Gedolei Sfarad. Toises many times quotes Goinim and rejects Goinim. Toises, they didn't accept anything as a given besides Shas. Did you ever see the Kuntras I wrote named Al Rishonim Val Achronim? No. Do you have the Kuntras Zois Torah Mincha that Beinish put together from my Chu? No. You're the first person that should have it. So my son-in-law Beinish put together a kuntras, just snippets of my tshuvas and writings about Darkei Limud and about, and there's a big kuntras named Al Rishonim Val Achronim, in which I discuss the development of Torah Shabbal Peh. How do we relate to the Vilna Gaon? Was he unique? Was he different? It's a very, very fascinating contest that I have shared with you, and you could share it with your Talmidim. Okay. Was that one or two? I don't remember.
That was one. I'm sensitive to how late it is. What, last one?
Okay, fine.
Okay, but it might cause trouble, so.
So if it causes trouble, we'll leave it for another time.
Okay, the question is a simple one, which is, would the world be a better place if communities were mixed and Dati Leumi people lived with Charedim and lived with Sfardim and all people lived together, as opposed to where we're moving towards, which is separate communities for all?
As long as we didn't try it, we cannot know. We have so much good things to learn from one another, but I'm not sure that will be the result. Maybe the result will be the opposite. I don't know. So, because I don't need to pass on this question halacha l'maaseh, nobody really presented it to me in a fashion that it's halacha l'maaseh. So let's leave the remainder of the discussion for another opportunity, okay?
Okay, so long as there's another opportunity.
There will be Bezrat Hashem, but a wise man once said, and usually when I use this expression, I mean, my late father used to say, I want to talk to a smart person, I need to talk to myself. That was something my father used to say many times. So when I quote a wise person, I mean someone's very specific. A wise person once said, who is the perfect Jew? He should have a Litvische cup and a Hasidic hearts. the integrity of a yeker, the innocence or the tamimus of a Hungarian Jew, the kvod Torah of a Sfardi, and the love of Eretz Yisrael of a Dati Leumi. That would be a perfect Jew. If we could put that all together, all into one, that would be beautiful. Would that be the result of living in mixed communities? Maybe, maybe not. It might drive us further apart. I don't know. But for weeks, we've had a background minyan where I live. And when I was shooting publicly, I said, we have a beautiful kehillah, the kehillah of Kagan Shmona. One Hasidic family, one family of 8 Tznikim, Peleg Yerushalmi, 3 Sfardim, 2 Dati Leumi. It's a beautiful kehillah. I got an angry letter from someone. How could I write that that's a beautiful kehillah? Didn't even respond to that letter. But it is a beautiful kehillah. They're all wonderful people. And it's a wonderful minyan. So this is the reality we live in. Have a beautiful Yom Tov, all of you. Zman Simchoseinu. We should share B'Seides Taivas. We should share many hours, wonderful hours of Torah. And Eli, my dear friend, you should inspire and teach. We should all be zeicher together. Lahagdil Torah v'lahadira. Horacham ani yokim lono asukas David ani folas. B'Seides Taivas. Good Yom Tov.